Welcome everybody to a new episode with Astrid, your APD, your dietitian with T, no C. And I have here with me Menno Henselmans again for a second time to finish off the first part we started not long ago. And we just need to get every answer from you. So this is the way it goes. We're going to go for and against. Going to be the first part. It's going to be a true or false or fact, which is the second part. And lastly, we're going to cover a couple of questions that are basically just general questions that we are like the audience that got to ask some questions. I was able to collect, and I think it's going to be awesome for you to answer. So let's get started with a rapid Q&A, and then we can go in more depth into the longer questions. So the first part is going to be for and against, and what would be your final verdict. So the first one is, having a pump when training is a sign of really good training, an effective training. Are you for or against a pump?
Against. I'm not against pumps, but I'm against the idea that it matters at all. I think it matters very little. Different individuals, some get a good pump, some exercise that are actually great, don't give you a pump. It means almost nothing.
Okay. What about mind-muscle connection? Are you for or against?
Mostly against. I think also people overvalue the idea of feeling their muscle a lot, and also focusing on the muscle in most research doesn't objectively increase muscle activity. It just makes you weaker, like most internal cues do. So I think most people are better off focusing on their technique and performance, and then the rest takes care of itself. The body will optimize muscle activity levels typically when you maximize performance with good technique.
Do you ever use mind muscle connection as anything that you could find useful for?
Yeah, when injured, for example, when it's actually beneficial to use a lower load and get at least the same stimulus for the muscle that you're focusing on. So in that sense, internal cues can sometimes be useful. When injured, elderly individuals sometimes it can also be useful as an indirect way to get people to use better technique, because sometimes people respond very differently to different cues. And for biceps curls, for example, some may not respond to the cue to keep the elbow back, but then when you tell them focus purely on the biceps contraction, they will stop moving their arm as much.
Okay. When we think about body fat set point, with a theory of that there is always a point of your body that will always kind of get back to in terms of body fat, are you for or against the theory?
Against. There's a lot of research now that it's only an equilibrium effect. So you end up in a certain body fat level based on your lifestyle, based on what you eat, your activity level. And if you change those things, then you can lower what people perceive as your set point, and you can do so permanently.
Okay. Is it any effect when, as we age, that you are more likely to always be more prone to not being able to perform higher strength or develop a very lean, really good physique?
Sure. Certainly things get more difficult as we age, but I think people dramatically overestimate the effects. I think injury tolerance is probably the most practical thing that we cannot do as much about, save for hormone therapy. But most of the effects, if you stay healthy and lean, those being key parts, most of the effects of age only occur at age 60 plus. So most people feel like in your 30s, things start going downhill. And that's only true if you stop exercising and paying attention to your diet in your 20s already. And then, then you might already start deteriorating in your 30s. But if you were staying healthy, fit, lean, good diet, most research finds that also testosterone levels, for example, don't start declining until your late 50s sometimes. And in most individuals, it starts way earlier because of their lifestyle. So it's more that a bad lifestyle makes you age faster than that your age makes you less fit.
That's true. I agree with that. Now, with CGM for weight loss, Are you for or against these continuous glucose monitors? Do you like them? Do you dislike them? Do you think they have any potential benefit or help in those who may not be type 2 diabetics, but they are kind of intrigued as to what their diet does to their blood glucose and maybe change or interfere or impact positively for like behavior change?
Probably not much. There was actually a recent study on this that found that continuous glucose monitors are inaccurate on a meal basis. So basically, if you give somebody the exact same meal twice, they will get sometimes very different results. It depends on the different occasion. That's due to time of day effects, meal timing effects, also what you ate previously. Those things can all have an impact, whether you trained before or not, how well you slept. So if you even do this type of testing, you have to do repeated testing and a lot of testing. And even then it's questionable if you really get anything out of it. If you're not diabetic and your blood sugar goes to high in the range or medium in the range, like, does it mean anything? Probably not, because most research finds that low and high glycemic carbs or diets have completely insignificant differences in terms of fat loss, weight loss, even health effects for the most part. So if you're not diabetic, you don't have severe carb intolerance, there's probably no point in measuring these things.
I agree. Now, with Ozempic, which is another very famous weight loss tool that we're seeing more and more nowadays, are you for or against it when it comes to weight loss and weight management and actually sustainable, maintainable weight loss results?
I'm for the development of these drugs, but for most individuals, I don't think they are the solution, because if you rely on a drug to get lean, and the drugs, they do work, I think the side effects might be slightly underrated, because digestive issues, for example, are very common. And maybe that's okay for a cutting phase, but the thing is, if you're relying on the drug to get lean, you're going to have a very difficult time staying lean. And if every time you need to take a drug to get to your goal body fat percentage, every time you bulked up or you had a holiday, you need to get back on the drug to lean out again, I don't think that's a sustainable lifestyle for many people. So the sustainability aspect is a serious issue. And that's compounded by the fact that research finds that even supplements can reduce self-efficacy. So when people start taking a supplement, and especially if it works, they find that, well, why should I diet? So there's direct research showing that people that take more supplements and that believe supplements are effective have lower self-efficacy with their diet. So basically they aren't as motivated to diet. They think diet's not as important. And I think that's going to be massively compounded by a drug like Ozempic, where it really does work. And that only makes people pay less attention to their diet. That's also the case with, for example, we see in some people that really shouldn't be using anabolic steroids, but they do. And they kind of flaunt their training and everything. And they're like, yeah, now it's drugs. And recently saw one video of a guy that actually said he got worse placings. A super honest guy. I don't remember his name, but high-level bodybuilder. And he said he got worse placings after he started going on gear because he didn't really put a lot of effort into his training and everything anymore.
Now, talking about that, we might go a little bit on the side, but what are your thoughts about people using, is this fat loss Clenbuterol?
Right.
What do you think about that? I hear there's a lot of people that they tend to use these, but it's kind of very shady. Like no one really talks about it. No one really disclose that they're using these kind of things, because they're not like literally steroids, but they're strong fat burners or whatever it is. But it's just a little bit, I don't know. I've just found that there's a lot more people using those kind of things, and they looking super shredded, and they are always claiming that it's just their diet, it's just their training and their good routine, but they are not disclaiming or disclosing these things. What are your thoughts about this particular compound?
Clenbuterol is actually much more potent than most people give it credit for. It's not just a stimulant, and most stimulants work by increasing energy expenditure relatively modestly. We're talking 5, maybe 10% per day if you're not taking crazy dosages, which most people are. And it suppresses your appetite. So in that sense, it helps a lot with fat loss. it doesn't make you lose fat if you're not in energy deficit, but it makes things a lot easier. Clen, however, is also potently anti-catabolic and even mildly anabolic. So there's research showing it also quite directly aids muscle growth. So it's a little bit more than caffeine.
Yeah.
And the thing, it's relatively safe, and that makes it popular among a lot of people. The main problem that Clen has is it's addictive, and not like heroin, but it is addictive, more like caffeine, but worse. And that's compounded by the fact that it reduces sleep quality a lot, because the half-life of Clenbuterol is something like 24 hours, 22 hours. I don't remember the exact figure, but it's very long. And that means that it's still going to be effective, even if you take it in the mornings. It's still going to disrupt sleep quality at night. And then the next morning, you feel like meh, and you're probably going to up the dosage a little bit. And so people very often cascade into much, much higher dosages, compounded by tolerance and worse sleep quality. It becomes a negative spiral quite quickly, where after a few weeks to months, you're on quite high dosages. And then it does start actually potentially being a problem for liver cholesterol values. Still not massively dangerous, but certainly not completely innocuous. So that's definitely some problems. And as for disclosing it, I think it is illegal. It's on most anti-doping lists. So yeah, it's definitely a scenario where a lot of people feel, or I feel that a lot of people are like, yes, you are. Most people would consider it kind of natty, but it really does help also with muscle growth. Like I said, I think it probably became more popular because before that, ephedrine was a thing. Ephedrine is safer, not as anabolic, anti-catabolic, a bit weaker, but also shorter in action. Ephedrine is actually, I would say, quite safe. It's like the better version of caffeine. Unfortunately, it got banned pretty much everywhere, but ephedrine would be something that's, and I think it's even technically natural. I'm not sure how they synthesize it, but I think it comes from a plant. So it's that would actually be just a better version of caffeine that is safer and has more non-abusive use.
And if you think about johimbine, which is kind of like another substance that is sort of like not used in all these fat burners, but some of the fat burners that use them, that seems to have a bit of a better effect on fat loss. Is this one similar to ephedrine, or is a little bit less potent, or has a different effect? What is the difference? Do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, johimbine had its moment in the sun, but it never really panned out. And that's, I think, makes a lot of sense because the research finds that they also develop tolerance really quickly. It might be somewhat synergistic with the others because it has a different mechanism of action. It doesn't have the same mental stimulation. That's also why people don't like it as much. It doesn't make you feel as good. It's more of a kind of raw thermogenic, if you will. And that makes it less nice to use. And I think the tolerance is quite quick, and the fat loss effects are really, really poor. There are a few studies which have massive methodological limitations that suggest that it might have some good use for fat loss, but then better controlled studies essentially found zero effects. Just for caffeine, by the way, caffeine is essentially zero effect on fat loss because the tolerance plus the marginal effect to begin with basically cancel out any long-term meaningful fat loss benefits. So yeah, johimbine really didn't make it after its popularity period, and I think that's for good reason. It just doesn't do that much. So also, you need to take it completely fasted for it to be even somewhat beneficial. Yeah.
Okay. So just looking at the overall of fat burners, of what we've said about any substance that helps or aids fat loss beyond just a calorie deficit, are you for or against fat burners?
Most fat burners really suck, so against. There's even there was a big research review where they looked at pretty much all the fat burners that are legal and over the counter, which ephedrine and Clenbuterol are not, by the way, in most places. And they concluded pretty much all of them are bunk. They don't really do much.
With medications that just turn your appetite off, like phentermine, for example. These ones are used in is populations that actually go to the doctor and tell the doctor, hey, I'm really struggling with my appetite. And they get this medication, but it seems to have a very potent effect on not just appetite, but just increases your heart rate. It's just uncomfortable. It has a lot of secondary effects. Are you someone who is pro or against these medications for appetite suppressant?
I'm not familiar with that specific one, but I think now the semaglutide, Ozempic type stuff, is probably better than any stimulant type medication because it will still increase blood pressure and probably have more effects. The new medications are probably the best in terms of reducing appetite with the least amount of side effects. But yeah, they do have all the aforementioned side effects.
Okay. Now, protein bars. Are you pro or against using protein bars? I'm not.
I'm not against, but I mean, in practice, I am against because if you use them for fat loss and you want to get the protein in, then the problem is they still have a lot of calories and they don't satiate at all. You can have 10 of the protein bars and then you're still hungry. Plus the digestive issues for a lot of people are really bad. Like if I eat one Quest bar, I feel like I'm going to give birth to our protein baby. It's really bad. So some people tolerate them pretty well, but a lot of people don't. And also they don't often realize it. They just have digestive issues. And then only when they cut out the protein products, they realize, oh, life can be better. So those are two big issues. Now, if you tolerate them well and you're bulking and you like eating them, yeah, it's fine, I guess. Just be aware that probably when cutting, you might have to switch them out again.
It would be always better to just switch or choose actual protein sources that will fill you up more. I just feel like the protein bars are so easy to overconsume as well. I see them as candy. Like I prefer if I can eat more better quality protein, I just rather eating an actual block of chocolate, and it's going to be more nicer, and I don't know, in my mind it's like this is going to taste way better and potentially less issues with my digestive system.
Yeah, more satiating, more nutrients.
That's fine, perhaps. Yeah. Okay. I know we talked about in our live before about reverse dieting, and I know you mentioned a bit of not being very happy about how it is used, or not thinking that it's a bit overrated. But I think that's where the live kind of cut us out, and we couldn't even continue. And I was explaining you that I guess depending on the population and depending with the people that we're working with, it may have some applicability. I, for example, work with a lot of clients that have been yo-yo dieting for so long, and they have had issues with their just eating more. They somehow think they only deserve eating on a calorie deficit or the very low calories. So when I start working with them and I tell them we need to gain muscle, we need to start just eating a bit more, then I kind of implement this modified reverse dieting and just increasing the calories slowly to get them gain confidence that they actually can eat more and give their body more energy, more nutrients, and actually have better energy to perform at the gym way better. Overall, what are your total or final verdict on reverse dieting? Are you for or against?
Against in the sense of the usage of the term as literally reversing the diet and spending needless time extra in energy deficit. Of course, if a client simply prefers, I actually have one client right now that's just too afraid to increase the calories, and I'm like, yeah, you can do it slow if you want, that's perfectly fine. You can also just do it faster. And she's like, no, I really I want to do it slowly, give myself time to adapt. That's perfectly fine for individual preference, but it won't improve any objective outcomes. And there is a difference, though, in how people implement it. Because, for example, Lane Norton and I had a seminar together, and we talked about this. And I said, yeah, I don't like the concept. And he said, I do really like the concept. But then we compared client scenarios where we have certain calories and what we do. And it turns out that we almost do the exact same things, but he calls it reverse dieting, and I don't. I just call it a conservative guess to get back to ultra mild energy surplus. And he's like, I call this reverse dieting. So there's also a difference there. At least that is based on a few years ago. So I don't know what Lane's current practices are, but there's also a difference in how we just call it, right? So reverse dieting might sound nice to some people, but I think the most important thing is that you get to at least maintenance or small energy surplus as quickly as is practical.
Yeah, there's been a couple of conversations around why don't using a different term that is not necessarily reverse dieting, but maybe just something that give the applicability of this protocol or this tool a bit more like truthfulness around what we are actually trying to do. That is not necessarily reversing the diet. We're not just incrementally going from deficit to your current maintenance. We want to take you to maintenance, and then from there see how much more can we increase, or can we implement that. So have you have any conversation around a different terminology, a different name that could be replacing this reverse dieting, so it changes or it clarifies better what the intention is?
In my clients, I just call it the transition to a lean bulk.
Mm-hmm.
I use the word transition, not just lean bulk, because technically the initial estimate I often give for the initial calorie increase is conservative, especially if the client is really opposed to gaining fat, which usually they are if they just got super lean. And therefore, they might end up at maintenance, depending on how adaptive their metabolism is. And if I see it's very adaptive, there's nothing happens to their weight at all, then I'll do another bigger jump. And we go from there. So usually there is a bit of a transition process, but my goal is not the process itself. My goal is to make sure we don't overshoot the energy surplus for lean bulk, because higher energy surpluses in lean bulk for natural trainees have very, very little additional effect on muscle growth.
When you say lean bulk, do you mean is like a little small surplus that takes you to have just a smaller flexibility in terms of energy to train more and maybe aid more muscle gain, but it's not an actual building phase? Or what would be the difference?
I would, the way I use a lean bulk, it's to find the maximum energy surplus and weight gain rate that we can achieve without objective fat gain. Okay. Which means it's going to be a small weight gain rate and a very small energy surplus in most trainings.
And how effective is that approach versus being a little bit more aggressive when we think about maybe just adding a bit more to the higher side or be more aggressive? That is that going to ensure adding more calories, adding more muscle, or not really?
I think the lean bulk approach is far, far more efficient, because there are two studies by Garf et al. From Norway. There's one recent study by Helms, and there's one more study about this, Rosenek et al. And they looked at what happens when you increase the calories beyond a small surplus. And collectively, they almost all find no significant or very marginal effects on muscle growth, but quite dramatic effects on fat mass. So the cost benefit deteriorates extremely rapidly. When you go into a small energy surplus, I think there is a benefit, although research actually does not technically support this at all. Like the current research doesn't really support that there's a benefit to being an energy surplus over maintenance. In my experience, though, especially for advanced trainees, it is beneficial because nothing happens anymore at maintenance. For me, for example, I'm not gaining absolutely zero muscle at maintenance. So a small energy surplus seems to be necessary, at least in more advanced trainees. But when you get to even the super, super small surplus, it's mostly just fat that you're putting on after that. And if you think about the actual amount of energy surplus that your body needs to build muscle, the math just comes out to very small numbers, because you're looking at net metabolizable energy density of a kilo of lean body mass, like 1,800 calories or something. Well, if you're going to gain a kilo a month, you're really happy. So more likely it's going to be less than half of that. So we're looking at 900 calories divided by 30. Yeah, you're looking at 30 calories per day energy surplus technically.
Oh, okay. So you would you say it's about a 5% surplus or 2.5%? What would be in terms of percentage the ideal minimum that you would be aiming for a lean bulk?
It depends a lot on the individual, because even
Okay.
though you might only need a net surplus of technically maybe even 30 calories, the absolute energy surplus compared to your maintenance, at least, where your weight was static, you might need a much bigger increase because people's metabolism adapts, it ramps up, and there's inefficiency in depositing the protein in your body. So it takes more energy to build the muscle than there's actually energy in the body. It's like when you're building a house, the actual amount of material that goes into the house is smaller than all of the materials that were used to build the house.
Yeah.
So you might still end up with an energy surplus of a couple hundred calories.
Okay.
I think 500 is already pretty aggressive for most people, but some people with very adaptive metabolism can even go above that, because their metabolism, their energy expenditure just keeps ramping up along with energy intake. And you need to kind of cross the point where you are going into the net surplus. And that is largely a matter of trial and error, seeing how someone's body composition data responds to a given change in energy intake. And that will tell you essentially how adaptive their metabolism is. Research talks about spendthrift and these kind of terms. I don't like those. They're very confusing, I find. And yeah, you just keep pushing up the calories until you see, okay, this person, they are gaining weight, they're gaining strength, but there's no consistent fat gain. And then you know you're probably in the right ballpark.
Okay. I have a question that I was going to ask at the end, but I think it kind of goes really well with talking about bulking and gaining phase. And is when we're thinking about the optimal energy surplus, and we have a client that is not necessarily 100% consistent, would you say not hitting their total calories on a consistent basis regularly, but they go, let's say, well, can I just cycle the calories a little bit and sort of like pay more attention to my total weekly calories like we do with fat loss? Or does this actually makes a more significant difference or affects the rate of muscle gain if we're not necessarily complying with the daily surplus?
I think for bulking, we have less leeway than we do when cutting. When cutting, we have a lot of leeway. And it's mostly just the weekly total that adds up. You can even do very aggressive protein sparing modified fast days throughout the week. I'm actually a fan of that for a lot of individuals, and then move more calories towards the training days.
Okay.
There's some research suggesting that might improve nutrient partitioning. But when you do same calorie intake or you use a calorie cycling approach, it doesn't appear to have a whole lot of effect during a fat loss phase, at least not on fat loss. And for muscle growth, I think, although we don't have a lot of direct research on this, I think it will be more important because of the small amount of muscle that you can build in a day. You can lose a lot of fat in a day, but you cannot build a lot of muscle in a day. So if you overshoot your energy surplus a lot in even just one day, that can result in significant fat gain, or it will be glycogen storage technically, but later on that will facilitate fat gain. So the risk is much higher compared to energy deficits, like undershooting during a cut or undershooting, like if you're in 10% energy deficit versus your target 20, you still lose some fat, still fine. Energy surplus, if you're not in energy surplus, you might not build muscle at all, or much less, especially as an advanced trainee. But then we overshoot, it's mostly going to turn fat. So it becomes more significant at the day level than at the week level.
Okay. So you definitely want them to be very, very compliant with their calorie targets as compared to in a fat loss phase, if they go higher days, lower days, but we focus more on these total weekly average. For a gaining phase, you want them to be much more consistent on a regular basis. So it's more important the daily compliance than the weekly average compliance.
Yes, I often tell my clients when you're bulking, the good news is you have a lot more leeway with your calories. The bad news is you're going to have to be stricter with your consistency.
Yeah. And would be, apart from the calories, obviously you want to make sure like your protein is a non-negotiable. Would you say because we have more calories, we have a bit of more leeway to be a little bit less consistent with the protein, or you want that to be also a non-negotiable?
I would still say it's non-negotiable. I'd say you have more leeway in the sense that you now have more calories. But you still want to get at least that 1.6 gram per kilogram, like 7.7 gram per pound, at least, and preferably 1.8 or 0.8. So, and it's just much easier when you're bulking. So the leeway comes in the sense that it's much easier. One observation, by the way, about this that I think that is consistent enough that I'm willing to mention it, even though there's no research on it, is I've seen negative body recomposition in some clients with very bad lifestyles, like through summer, for example, where they essentially crash diet for 5 days and then massively overeat in the weekends or any other type, social eating type event. And the actual negative body recomposition. And that's extremely rare to see negative body recomposition, but that essentially means that what must be happening is that they're massively overshooting on a fat gain on the days that they overeat. And they are probably losing some muscle, at least, on the days that they are essentially crash dieting to even end up at maintenance for the whole week. And that makes sense in light of what we just discussed with bulking. The energy surplus, it doesn't compensate because you're still only building a tiny bit of muscle in that one day. Especially if you're not even going into a bulk, the hormones aren't back yet, you don't have the leptin levels up regulated. So the massive energy surplus on that one day is not going to compensate for the muscle loss from the other days.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. And I think it is just tricky for certain individuals to, like, if they are very busy or they are not necessarily training lovers, they may not have the best strategy to go for. And like, well, I am going to be a bit less aggressive during the week with the crash dieting and just focus on something that is more sustainable and not going crazy over the weekend. So that makes absolutely sense. And I think that's kind of the origin for those skinny fat terminology. Like they just lose so much muscle and they just don't follow proper protocols when it comes to body recomposition, that they just end up losing muscle and gaining fat. And yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty common these days, like sarcopenic obesity, technically it's called, which more colloquially known as skinny fatness, which is new. It used to be the case that overweight people quite consistently had higher muscle mass levels than leaner people because you just ate more of the same foods. But now, because the diet quality is so much worse, they don't build any muscle, or even if they're at low protein intakes, might lose some while gaining a lot of fat.